Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. What would it take to convince you? This week we are looking at Bible people who messed up and how we are like them, and there's part of me, and I'm betting part of you, that understands how Gideon messed up. Let me start at the beginning. When Gideon's story opens, the nation has been conquered by the Midianites. Well, that doesn't mean much to us, but it's something akin to our nation being ruled from Mexico. It was an odious arrangement, one that meant that taxes were paid to Midian, and the soldiers from Midian could and did come and take whatever they wanted. So when Gideon's story begins, we find him threshing his grain in a wine press. We don't get what that means at first, but what it was about was that Gideon was threshing his grain in a way that would be hidden from anyone seeing him. If no one saw him, soldiers couldn't see him and couldn't come and take his grain, and the tax collectors couldn't see him either and take his grain in taxes. He doesn't really come across as a bold and fearless leader that you might want to lead an army. Nevertheless, that's when God calls him. An angel comes and tells Gideon to lead the people out of the oppression that Midian was bringing on the people. And at first, he seems to do well. He pulls down an altar of Baal, and when Baal's priests want to set it up again, he leads the people to say, if Baal is real, let him put his own altar back up. Now that's a bold man of faith. But then God tasks Gideon with raising an army, and then tells him to lead the army in battle against Midian, and that's where Gideon wavers. Instead of doing it right away, he casts a fleece. What that means is that Gideon took a sheepskin and said to God, you say that you are going to deliver Israel by my hand, but in order to make sure, I'm going to put this fleece of wool out on the threshing floor tonight, and in the morning, if there is dew on the fleece, but the ground is dry, I'll know that you really want me to do this. And in the morning, that's exactly what he found. Would that convince you? Well, it didn't convince Gideon. Then he said, just to be sure, tonight let the ground be wet with dew, but the fleece dry as a bone. And again, it was so. Well, that was proof enough for Gideon, and he did lead the army into battle. But the thing is, casting the fleece points to a fundamental lack of trust in God. Gideon wanted to be sure, and in doing so, he was hoping to manipulate God into acting. Another way to say this was that he was putting God to the test. And so often we do the very same thing. We might experience the Holy Spirit leading us into uncharted waters, and we want some kind of assurance and proof. It's hard simply to trust. We are at the same time both fearful and self-dependent, and therefore reluctant to trust in God alone. It's all so much easier if we have guarantees. But guarantees aren't trust, and God calls for trust. In truth, in the end, we have the same thing Gideon had. We may not cast a fleece, but we have God's promise to be with us. And what Gideon learned, perhaps what we can learn, is God's promise never fails. What would it take to convince you? We have God on our side. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.